Hello everyone. In my last recording, I talked about some theories I had. Unfortunately, I won't be able to cover all the theories, but I can at the very least share some of the builds that I've worked with and I think that are successful. Due to how long of an explanation this is going to be, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the categories for the passives, and then I'll cover the skills at the end, plus equipment. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll go and start with range. I'm going to skip past the Pistol plus Cabalist build. That's a super common build. I don't see a need to even experiment with it or try to improve it. Instead, I'm focusing my energies on builds that I haven't done yet, at least to my knowledge. With that in mind, there are two builds that I can see of doing with ranged that haven't been done, again, to my knowledge. One's Havoc Orb, and one's running Pistol+Shield. Havoc Orb does a lot of damage but costs a lot of rage. With that in mind, when you look at your passive tree, you're going to want to look for rage cost reduction, damage, and critical. They're the three priorities of running a Havoc or build. You should be at a point where you can dodge most hits, so you shouldn't have to worry about taking resists or health. It will certainly help, but it should be the lowest priority. Now, there's of course a couple ways to do that, but the best ways that I can see of to work with Havoc Orb is of course getting Furious Appetite, just like any of the builds that will be in this recording, and running Exorcist for Blessed Silver, because you'll be doing a critical build. You want to make sure that you get Blessed Silver. It will increase the damage of Havoc Orb, plus you can refresh your ammunition points whenever you deal critical hit, so that certainly helps. So I would say your most effective way is Exorcist, Ranger, and quite possibly Sentinel. That'd probably be the best way to handle this. Just completely go through these right here, and then worry about the rest later. Rest meaning Assassin and some of these others that will certainly help with that, because Assassin's one of the few ways to get critical hit chance score. Alistair is the other. So once you get through Ranger and some of the other stuff, I would say put a priority either on Alistair, Assassin, or Exorcist. That would be the best way to handle things. When you're doing this, do not take Puncturing Shot though. This will completely mess up the Havoc Orb build, 100%. The problem with Havoc Orb is that once you upgrade to the rocket launcher, if you have the +1 pierce to all projectiles, the rocket will go through the enemy that you're intending to hit and hit the other one behind them. While they may seem good in theory, the problem is that Havoc Orb needs to hit a target for the splash damage to take effect. So you want to make sure that it's hitting the target you want to kill, because otherwise it's not going to do much. So don't take Puncturing Shot if you do Havoc Orb. So that's the Havoc Orb passive. Let's look at Shield plus Pistol. If you're running Shield plus Pistol, you're going to want to go down here into Brutal Imposition and Bane of Tyranny. Now, they have patched Bane of Tyranny so that it's reading properly. It is 0.5 damage, along with Brutal Imposition. There's two of them over here. So that's great, because if you look back at my last recording, you'll see that this was registering as +50, and I knew that was too high to be legitimate, because if it was +50, that means one hand would have done more than two hand. So, yeah, if you run Pistol plus Shield, make sure to go Brutal Imposition at some point. I would say that would be a higher priority than anything else initially, but then after that, I would start working on survivability, damage, and things like that. Now, if you're doing one-handed shield, it's perfectly fine to take Puncturing Shot if that's what you want to do. It will certainly help, but it all depends on how you want to do your build. At the end of the day, how you do your damage and stuff, that's entirely up to you. There's tons of ways you can do it, and I don't see a problem with it as long as you're sticking with the nodes that actually help, like Alistair, Ranger, Exorcist, or one of those. Assassin's another good one. You know, the more that I look at it, I don't think that White Arrow is really that great for these ranged builds, because you'll notice that most of it's frost damage. And there's only one node in here for Pierce, and so while that is nice and all, the problem is that you're not really getting much out of these passives other than frost damage. If you're running Stings of Creon with Frost Arrow, then that would work, but seeing as we're not doing it with that with these two builds, I don't see this as being a good passive tree. You'll find far better passives in here and some of the other places than that. So that's how I would run those two ranged builds. Let's go and talk about melee, seeing as we just went over Brutal Imposition. I think that it's important to run shield plus either one hand or pistol if you're going through the campaign. The campaign has some ridiculously hard bosses that I think need to be fixed. Unfortunately, you just won't have the passives or the equipment to really handle those bosses. So what you're going to have to do is just run this so that you actually have some survivability plus damage. Very early on, one-handed with shield will do more damage than two-handed for the most part, assuming you have Brutal Imposition and Bane of Tyranny. So what you want to do early on is run that, and then if you want to stay with one-handed, fine. But if you want to transition out to two-handed once you get to the end game, then that's perfectly fine. That's actually how I would do it, is get to Bane of Tyranny for your campaign build, and then you can respec for Primordial Essence and be perfectly fine. But yeah, so if you're running one hand, in order to keep up to date with the end game, you're going to have to run damage more than block. You already have a significant amount of block chance on most shields anyways, so I don't see a point in running that unless you have spare points. Your main priority should be damage, health, and resists. If you happen to be able to do it, regeneration rate I think is more important than block chance. This is a very hard passive to find. You'll notice that there's only two that I'm aware of, Perseverance and Regenerative Body. So what this means is it changes the tick rate of health regen and lifesteal. Just like Energy Shield, health has a certain amount of time before it will tick or do its regen, and then it lowers it. If you run Bruiser Helmet, Chest Piece, and Pants, that will also make the tick rate faster. So those certainly help. I would say that those are more priority than block chance. But yeah, if you run two-handed, your priority is going to be just resist and health, because block chance really won't help you even if you get Kingless Aegis and all this up from Arms Maester, because Arms Maester will add to the block chance. To be honest, it's too many points to really make it effective. You're just better off just eating the hits. It's not like you have Juggernaut anyways. But yeah, so assuming that you can get all of this, that would be awesome. But yeah, you would want to run critical. And as for both two-handed and one-hand, I would say that if you are going to be throwing points, like assuming that you've done the build that you want to, if you're going to be throwing points into block chance by the time that you've gone through all this, I would say consider EOS before that, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. But this right here, Dawn's Pious Striker, dealing sacred damage instantly kills enemies below 15% of their max health, and you can upgrade that. This is actually a really cool passive, and we'll go over that in just a minute. But for now, let's go ahead and just cover one of the casting builds. I do agree that casting is still not the best, and that's just because it can't scale as well as melee or ranged. However, if you are going to run spell builds, there is one spell that I have seen do a ludicrous amount of damage. Actually, I think it's the one that does the most damage, and that's Infinity Blades. Now, a lot of people in the Discord for Wolcen will say that Infinity Blades is not very good, but I've looked at their builds, and I can already see why they're saying that. It's because it's not built properly. The problem with Infinity Blades is that it requires more of an understanding of the game than the other skills. The other skills are very straightforward, you just run damage and whatnot. But unfortunately, Infinity Blades requires a knowledge of the mechanics to really get a grasp of what you're doing. So with Infinity Blades, you're going to want to do the same thing as the Havoc Orb build, in which you're reducing your costs. So you're going to need willpower cost reduction, and there's plenty of ways to do that. You're going to want after that, you're going to want to run spell damage, spell cast speed, energy shield, and critical strike. Let's go ahead and talk about the areas that I think that should be a focus of yours in comparison to some of the others. So I think that most of the Infinity Blades build is going to be reliant on first and second wheel, because the only thing that I can see in third wheel really helping this build is Alistair. Outside of that, your best groupings is going to be Cabalist, which is, I didn't change the wheel by the way, so it's going to be on the bottom for this, but under Cabalist you'll find this, Power First Men, 50% chance to multiply the number of ailment stacks inflicted by 2. Then you can increase that to 100% with that. Then of course you'll find over here ailment stacks. I would not take this, Insidious Decay. I would only take Master of Curses, plus 5 ailment stacks. You have a bunch of Force Shield nodes, which is great, but I would only do it for the max ailment stacks at first, and maybe the spell damage is right here. But then eventually the other one that's of value over here is Grievous Afflictions, which is plus 1 additional ailments. Status ailment chance score right there. I would not take Crippling Decrepitude. Anything that lowers your damage is something you don't want, because Infinity Blades is already pretty low damage base, so you don't want to do that. Primordial Insights is good because you're doing critical anyways, so that's pretty much the only areas I would work with on Cabalist, is the ones I mentioned. That's Primordial Insights, these two passives, this major node, I'd only come down through Force Shield or through here, the middle. Spell damage is perfectly fine, but at the end of the day, Power First Men. So that's Cabalist. Of course, Assassin will help you because you have Force Shield right there, critical hit chance score right there, attack speeds, or no wait, we're doing Infinity Blades, yeah. So only that right there will help you. This more right side with Merciless Lethality, that's the only area in Assassin that will help you. For Scholar, these two Steadfast will certainly help, and of course, Attrition Strategist also helps greatly. Occult Status Ailment Chance Score, this is where you want to go if you're doing Infinity Blades. Ether damage is considered occult, not elemental, so you want to do that. Element score and then that. I wouldn't worry about Thirst for Knowledge or Purifier's Will, but the passives right next to Purifier's Will are perfectly fine. For Warlock, Faith Leech is it certainly helps, but there are other ways to sustain your shield, so I wouldn't put too high of a priority on that. Resilience to Corruption is a very high priority because you want the damage over time going to your shields, not your health. With this build, you will be running Force Shield, so you need to make sure that you're not taking health damage. Residual energy is not really helpful. Duty to exterminate can help, but I would consider that a low priority. Raining in the darkness will certainly help with that critical that you're trying to do. And of course there's willpower regeneration and spell cost reduction right there, which is exactly what you need. Willpower or spell cost reduction all helps. And then finally, the only other area that would help you is Time Weaver. Under here you'll find ailment chance score, ether damage, eventually max ailment stacks. The two are right here, plus 5 for the 2 passives, so that's 10 in total. Which time cannot heal will certainly help with this build. I don't see Gyro Juncture being helpful, nor Captured Velocity. I would ignore those, but which time cannot heal. That's probably the only major node in here that would help. The passives is really what you want to focus on in here. So let's go ahead and discuss why this build was more specific than the other ones. I didn't really go into much detail with the melee range builds because it's just very flexible. Infinity Blades is not so much. There's a reason Infinity Blades has a very specific build. You'll notice under here that you want to get Sublime Cut, Willpower on Kill plus 24, Willpower on Critical Hit plus 25, Timeline Selection, Force Field Condensator, increases damage dealt while Force Shield is not empty. You can see this is why I'm going Force Shields. Then some other notable ones is Anti-Mobility Form, increases damage of the skill for each ailment stack inflicted on target. Notice why I was going for all those max ailment stacks. Your base is 5, and between all those passives, it should be plus, what, 10 for each of those groupings, so that's plus 25. Yeah, it's 25 ailment stacks that you can inflict on an enemy. So you do need to trigger your elements as much as possible to guarantee that the extra damage is coming through. Some of the other stuff in here is kind of like but Spherical Repulsion can sort of help. It's Force Shield on hit plus 2. If you get enough spell cast speed, you should be able to get a lot of Force Shield back, but it won't be enough to compensate for the damage that you're really receiving. So eventually you want to get Magnetized Strikes for plus 10%. And maybe Cosmic Recursion. I don't know about that one yet. I haven't gotten that far to really experiment with it. But I wouldn't worry about the 360 thing in here. Printed Record might be fine. I haven't really experimented with that all that much, but that actually might be better than Cosmic Recursion. Ailment damage isn't too big of a deal with Ether because it's not really there for damage. You're just using it for triggering the Anti-Mobility Form rune. Field of Sapience, that actually might be fine, but you would have to run a high block chance for that to work. And unfortunately, spell damage is really, well, spell or ether damage is really the only way to up the damage on Affinity Blades. It doesn't scale off of your weapon, so you're going to be spending most of your points in that or Force Shield and Critical. So there's not really much room for doing block. So, yeah, you have to kind of keep that in mind. So, seeing as we've already discussed why the Infinity Blades build is more specific, let's go ahead and go over how to do it. So if you're going to be doing the Infinity Blade build, you're going to want to run it with a Dagger and Catalyst. The reason for running it with Dagger and Catalyst is for Mark of Impurity. You'll notice it says only usable with daggers, bows, and pistols. Curses a target, increasing the damage it takes. This is another way to increase the damage output you're having. Now, because the dagger is melee, that means you can trigger Wings of Ishmir and the Shout. So by the time that you get all of your willpower and rage reduction from the passive tree, you should be able to get this down to a pretty low number, and there's actually ways to lower it even further. I believe, let me just double check that. Elements, smart, acceleration. No, I guess not. Okay, I thought there was. I might be mistaking it for another skill, but you can lower its cooldown and other things, so. But yeah, this will certainly help you put out the damage. Another skill that you want to run as a priority with Infinity Blades is Bulwark of Dawn. Bulwark of Dawn, the effect can regenerate Force Shield, and this will be your way to keep your Force Shield up when you're running Infinity Blades. So if you're doing it that way, I would not run Blade of Truth. You don't need that with this particular build. Instead, you want to focus on anything that increases the duration or regen. So something like this, Everlasting Aurora, Haven of Men. Let me see. Move, cooldown, that's good. Reduces willpower cost, that's also good. Increases healing rate, that's good. Oh, this is definitely what you need. Yeah, Divine Omnipresence. This should be a top priority to make sure that it's staying with you, so you can move around as much as you need to, because once you get to end game, you'll be dodging a lot. So you're going to want to make sure that this stays with you. So yeah, that's Bulwark of Dawn. So in total, you're going to be running Bulwark of Dawn, Infinity Blade, Juggernaut, Wings of Ishmir, and Sovereign Shout. These will be how you get the rage that you need to cast the Juggernaut and Markham thing. So those are all your skills right there. So that covers Infinity Blades. Now we have to go over all the other stuff. So with Havoc Orb, Dust Shroud certainly helps, because eventually you'll get into Shrouded Assailant, which allows you to attack while invisible. Let me see if I can find the other stuff in here. B, C, D, G, H, there it is, Havoc Orb. Okay, so for Havoc Orb, there was a reason why I was saying the projectile thing. So you don't want Pierce because you'll want to upgrade to Glory to Mankind. Fires rockets in a straight line that have a reduced explosion radius but increased damage. So this is what you want to do. Now, the projectile will be really slow, and you want it to explode on the target intended. It has a pretty big blast radius, even with this reduction. It still has a 2.5 meter explosion radius. And if you really need to, you can up it with effect radius right there, but your main priority should be weapon damage. There's one right there, there's another down there, there's critical damage right there, and there should be critical hit chance score. Yeah, there it is right there. So that should be your priorities. After Dust Shroud and Havoc Orb, I would say just run whatever feels good to you. With the Pistol and Shield build, I would say you could run probably Stings of Kurion, this one right here, or I guess you could try Gunslinger's Brand. I haven't really messed with this enough, so while it seems nice and all, I'm not really sure how fast it'll cast and all that. So there's that. I'll let you kind of figure things out. Let's go and talk about melee now. So with melee, I found Wrath of Baapheth to be the best skill. Everybody likes that spin to win build, whirlwind or whatever it is, but I just don't see a point in it, because it requires you to be up close with the target, whereas Wrath of Baapheth actually does have some range, plus its cleave. So Wrath of Baapheth can actually engage a target for you at safe distances. If you happen to be up close to the target, well, this can just do an absurd amount of damage, plus it can convert to sacred damage. This is why I was saying EOS may be a good consideration rather than block chance if you're doing one-handed shield, because that means Wrath of Baapheth can trigger the Pious passive, which means that if the enemy is below 15% health, they can die to this. Pretty awesome. Now, if you're running Wrath of Baapheth, you want to make sure that it's running damage and rage cost reduction. Rage generally, when killing an enemy, it really isn't enough to sustain it. I've noticed. I've tried it numerous times, but your passive tree will give you more rage than that will. So you just want to reduce rage cost and increase damage. And you can do that any number of ways, but eventually I want to get into Lumbering Blows and then try to counter that with Wounded Pride, because that's plus 50% weapon damage. That's the biggest one in here. It's also the very last rune as well. So we'll see if I can make that happen. I don't know yet. But yeah, Wrath of Baapheth is really good. Wings of Ishmir and your Shout are your rage generators. So if you happen to get low, you can cast those. Just like Wrath of Baapheth, Wings of Ishmir does have a sacred damage conversion, so that means Wings of Ishmir can also trigger the EOS thing. But yeah, rage generation and damage is probably what you want to do with this one. But there's not as many of them in here. You can see that there's not really much there. There's the one right there. But yeah, other than that, there's not really much for it. As for your Shout, this has a lot of good stuff in terms of buffs. It's just all a matter of what you want. I personally like the crowd control immunity. The weakness kind of helps, but I think there are other things in here. Like that, maybe. Because for melee, you don't have access to willpower as much, so having Health Globe Generation is pretty awesome. Because that's an instant heal, essentially. Yeah, so there's a lot of buffs in here, but you can kind of figure it out. But I do think, at the very least, crowd control immunity is the most important in here. As for Juggernaut, this applies to the Pistol and Shield build, as well as the one-hand shield build and two-handed. Under here, this is how I think it should be done. Crushing Wall to increase damage, or to cause damage on enemies that hit it. Reduce damage from projectiles. Increase damage absorption. The reduced movement speed can be countered with your passive tree or with equipment. I don't see it as a big deal. Reduces rage cost. Awesome. Cooldown. Awesome. Even more shield absorption. Awesome. Now, if you're running the pistol and shield or the one-hand sword and shield build, you can do banners held high if you want to. That would probably do more than these right here, but if you're running two-hand, this is the best way to handle it. But, yeah, that's really just how I see to run these builds. That's all I have. Hopefully this helps you think about your build and get you into the endgame. Thanks for listening.